Right, just welcome everybody. Good afternoon. Just to let you know, this is a webinar, so it's not your typical Zoom. So we cannot see or hear you, you can only see us. It is recorded and we will be sending the PowerPoint out after the event, and all the resources will also be emailed out to you as well. So it's great that we've got some newcomers on our webinar today, but it's also fantastic that we've got some participants that joined us on our first one at the start of July. So welcome everybody. So this is our second webinar, and today our webinar is about questioning. So we're going to give you a bit of theory behind questioning and its importance in teaching, and also some of the strategies that hopefully you'll be able to use in your own classroom. But also, if you're an experienced teacher, it might just be a bit of a refresher for you. If you're a newly qualified teacher, you might be learning something new today. So just hope that there's something beneficial for all people at whatever stage in your teaching career you are at the moment. So I'll just introduce myself. My name is Avril Townsend, and I've been teaching for nearly 20 years. I have been a head of science for 6 years, and I'm starting a new post in September as a lead practitioner of science. I'll just pass you over to Gary, my colleague, and he will just introduce himself.
Hello everyone, my name is Gary Talbot. I am a science teacher by trade. I've been teaching over 10 years. In that time I've been an assistant head of science, a lead practitioner, and also an assistant head teacher. We still both currently do teach. I'm starting a new job in September, so that's a little bit about me. Luckily today we've got a very, very special guest with us today, who is Dr. Tony Sherborne. So Tony, do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself? You'll need to unmute yourself, Tony. There you go.
So I've been teaching for about 10 years, but then I had a slight career gap for about 25. So I've been moving on to other things since then, curriculum development being my interest. And as you'll see, I'm trying to hone in on what makes the ideal science curriculum. How can we actually teach for understanding and applying knowledge?
Okay, thank you. So just at the start, we had a little bit of a game. There was loads of funny answers and loads of correct answers. So if you wanted to know the answers to the song thing at the beginning, they're on the screen now. I wonder if anybody got number 5, the Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers, as the artist. That was quite a hard one. But some of the other ones were easy. So well done if you managed to get all of those correct. You got all 14. So I just want to say a massive thank you to everyone who's attended today. We've actually blown away with the amount of people from all over the world that are attending today. So we've got, you can see on the screen, there's 28 different countries where our participants, or you guys, are from. So I'd just like to welcome all of you today from all the different countries. And we do apologise if our UK Northern accents are quite confusing at times, but we'll try our best to speak the Queen's English as it is. Thank you.
So you've already been using some of these communication functions already. So there is a Q&A function, and if you want to ask us any specific questions, you can do that in the Q&A function. So that will just be for us to view, and if we have time at the end, we'll come back to those. And also there's the chat function where you've been putting your answers to the music little quiz at the beginning. So if you can use that to share any ideas that you might have as we're going through the presentation, you might have some good ideas yourself that might be worth sharing with us and other participants. So use that to communicate, please.
Okay, it's always good to start a webinar with a quote. One of the geniuses, Albert Einstein, he famously said, the important thing is not to stop questioning. And I think as teachers, one of the most important tools in the classroom is questioning. And we're going to look at why in a second. But I think throughout life as general, you know, we should always try to learn new things and question things as to why things happen and why things don't happen. So I pay homage to the brilliant mind of Albert Einstein to start us off. Avril?
So just do a bit of participant interaction. We'd like to ask you a quick question on average, how many questions do you think a teacher asks in a day? So we're just going to give you 30 seconds to respond to that, and then we'll see what answers we've got.
Yeah, they're coming in very quick. Wow, I've never seen it pull so quick. It's just gone up massively. I think we're nearly at everyone voting. Give you another couple of seconds. Anyone else to get their answer in on the poll? Okay, I think we've got it. So I'll share the polling with you now. So people went with majority of 240 questions. The people who went with 400, that is roughly the estimated amount of questions we answered. So well done if you selected 400. Okay, moving on. So what we'd like to do now in the chat is I want you just to put some answers to this question. So why do we actually question students in our lessons or on worksheets or in tests? What's the whole point of asking students questions? So if you could put your answers, we'll give you a minute to do that in the chat function, and we'll read some out in a minute. Yeah, we've got some good answers coming in. Give you another 20 seconds. Some really, really good answers. I'm liking it. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. So we've got some really good answers there. One of the things myself and Avril came up with, and using the internet as research and from our general teaching, one of the big important things is to engage students with the work as opposed to just getting on with it and that's it, leaving them to it. So it's a way to engage with the teacher and the pupils, helping students to actually think about things, pulling information and making their brains work. Active discussion, so not only the teacher asking questions, but pupils asking each other questions as well through discussion. Biggest thing, I think most people said this, was checking their understanding. Have they understood what you've just taught them or not? And clarifying their understanding. So have they learnt what you just taught them, but do they really understand what you've just taught them, or are they just reciting the knowledge? Critical thinking skills, really important for life. Review previous lessons, I think a couple of people said that one. Independent learning, so when you're setting them off on activities, it's good for them to think on their own and work on their own using those questions that you've set. And speaking and listening skills, I think it's always good for confidence as well when pupils are speaking in front of other people, a skill which, you know, a lot of people use in their everyday jobs. And one thing we thought was respect other people's opinions. I know in some subjects like RE and stuff, it's really important, PSHE, it's really important for people to know how to respect other people's opinions. So types of questions. So the first common type of questions which a lot of teachers ask, and I think the research that suggests that is about 80% of questions what teachers ask in a lesson on average are closed questions. So these are just the basic simple response ones, the simple recall. For example, what's the capital of France? Avril, do you know that one?
Paris.
There you go, well done. So they're really, really good for recall knowledge, getting bits of information. I know I use these a lot when I'm just teaching knowledge stuff. Obviously the disadvantage of closed questions, you can't really expand on the answer or give a reason or opinion for certain things. The opposite of that are open questions, and they require pupils to think deeper and promote a longer response for them in their answers. So, for example, what were the consequences of the assassination of Duke Ferdinand? History people out there hopefully should be able to reel loads of consequences of that. I can't think of many. I think all I think is the start of the World War. Obviously, advantage of that is enriching learning by encouraging them to think for themselves, and also checking the knowledge and understanding on a deeper level, as opposed to just can they recall facts, and also applying that knowledge to certain situations on different contexts. Linked to closed questions, you have the lower order questions, so you can see those on the right hand side of the screen. Facts, recall, knowledge. And what's quite interesting is the studies of scientific research have actually found that they're actually more beneficial to younger students. So if you teach in primary or younger children, then what they've said is that teachers should use a lot more of these lower order questions with younger students, because it helps them build up their knowledge before you move on to the harder stuff. If your goal is to commit factual information to memory, then they're really, really good for that purpose. And then the other type is the higher order questions. So you can see questions on the right linked a little bit higher order, similar questions to the ones on the lower order. You can use them for different things: interpretive, evaluating things, inquiry, synthesis of information. And what the research suggests is that teachers should use a higher percentage of these questions in the lesson. So they recommend that questions that you ask, whether they're a worksheet or whether they're verbal questions, should be about 50% or higher. So 60–70% of your questions should be higher order. And that's particularly most effective with older students, secondary school pupils, high school pupils, etc. And we're not saying that you should just use higher order questions all the time, because both of them are just as important. That the research found that combining both lower and higher is just as important than just having either lower or higher questions. They are supposed to, or the research suggests that they will improve learning by delving in deeper to what pupils understand, but it doesn't always guarantee success. So I could write a list of higher order questions and ask them to my class, and that's not necessarily going to improve learning. I need to make sure that I also model as a teacher how to actually ask those questions. And one of the things I like to do when I'm doing an exam question, for example, might be an evaluate question, and I go through how I would answer that question, talk about my thinking process, and then when I do another question with them as an independent practice, I would then ask them to tell me how did they come up with the answer, or why have they given that answer. So probing a little bit deeper. So we need to make sure that we're doing both those things. We're modelling how to do it, and we're asking those higher order questions. So what we'd like you to do now, in the chat for us, if you will, there's an image on the screen. What we'd like to do is just to ask one question. If you're a student and we were teachers now, and we put this up as a starter at the beginning of our lesson, what question could you ask about this particular picture? So we'll just give you about 30 seconds in the chat to ask some questions. Good questions there. Give you another 10 seconds. Okay, very, very interesting. So there's lots and lots of questions. And what's on TV? If you've never seen Casper the Ghost, I think it's Casper the Ghost that he's watching. But yeah, I think the question in my mind would be, why is he enclosed in there and watching a cartoon on TV? So this next piece of research is very, very common in the teaching profession. People, you've all probably seen this many times in your teaching career. So it comes from Bloom, Benjamin Bloom, he actually devised this in 1956. And it's sort of a hierarchical order of cognitive skills on how we think. And it can be used by teachers, or I've used it as a teacher, to teach students and students to learn, basically using a sort of set hierarchical process of asking questions. Now, as a teacher, I've used this process when I'm writing my learning objectives or my outcomes, when I'm creating assessments or worksheets, planning my lessons, or when I'm thinking about what questions am I going to ask in that lesson, and then also when I'm doing curriculum, so when I'm writing my scheme of work or my curriculums, I always need to think about, throughout the curriculum, are these questions being used? If you've never seen Bloom's before, the idea is at the bottom is the lowest order of questioning, so the remembering and understanding, and as you move towards the top, you've got the higher order sort of questions and thinking. The original model did have evaluating and synthesis at the top, but in 2001, some more psychologists came along and they changed the top one to creating, as they thought that was more of a more difficult cognitive process. And as you can see on the left, we'll share this with everybody as well. This is a list of some question stems. So I always use this when I'm doing my objectives or I'm planning questions. I'll have a look at this and try and start off with the question stem, say for evaluating, is there a better solution to such a thing, such a thing? So have a look at those, have a quick look. What we'd like you to do now, based on that Bloom's taxonomy and the order, I want you to try and think of a question for this image, which might be a little bit higher order. So try and choose one from applying, from analysing, evaluating, or creating. So here's the image this time. So see if you can think of a higher order question. Ooh, I like that one. Design a method of extracting the person who is stuck. Are the consequences of being stuck in the snow? Yep, sorry, I'll put the questions back on so you can see them. Okay, thank you very much, guys. So I think even just thinking about planning your questions when you're teaching massively helps you to actually do more of those higher order questions as opposed to just keeping them at the remembering and understanding stage. And, you know, we're going to help our pupils think more and hopefully progress more in the learning and understand things better. Over to you, Tony.
Okay, so what I'm going to attempt to do is to describe a piece of work we're doing right now to help students with the most difficult part of Bloom's taxonomy, I think, which is to make the leap from basically having some basic knowledge to being able to apply their understanding. We know this is why in science students find it so hard to do well in exams, because they just don't have the grasp of the fundamental ideas, the tough concepts that really underlie your ability to apply your knowledge. So how can we use questions to get students to understand more deeply? I don't know if you've experienced this as a teacher, but there aren't enough questions in books and worksheets of the right kind to properly give students the chance to grasp the main idea. And so these questions aren't giving them enough opportunity to learn, which means we want a bit more of a systematic process to designing what we call questions for understanding. And I'm going to call them a question set to make it clear what I mean. Next slide, please. So I'm going to describe a simple design process with an example from science of how you can create a set of questions that would take students from basic knowledge towards being able to apply it to solve problems. And there are two steps. First, we have to really understand what we mean by the understanding. So what is this idea you're really trying to get across? And then only when you've got that clear do you write the questions. Next. So step one involves at least 3 steps. These are the ones that we've used. First, it helps to categorize what your idea is. Is it a concept, process, principle, or model? Because different ideas require different kinds of questions. And also, it's a good idea to understand the sort of thinking. If you're doing science, for instance, are you describing what's out there, like classifying organisms? Or are you trying to explain a theory? Or are you trying to get towards an equation, which is mathematical? Again, knowing the idea helps you decide where you're going with these questions. Secondly, you get really analytical and you break down the understanding into bits, because teaching bits is easier than teaching the whole thing together. And thirdly, we cheat. We say, well, if we know what we want students to be able to apply to, then we can see how to get there. Next slide. So I'm going to give you an example from science to make this, I hope, a bit more concrete. We choose the example of natural selection, which is a difficult idea for students to grasp, the explanation of evolution. But it's also one that you can probably apply to lots of other subjects if you teach history or geography, because we all have to understand theories and processes, whatever the discipline. Next slide. So you've got your idea and you break it down into bits, because we're going to question and check understanding of each bit. Natural selection is actually a process that's summarized as 4 stages. And it's amazing the number of students who don't really understand that it is these sequence of stages that interact to produce the overall effect of evolution. We won't describe how we teach them, but bear in mind, these are the 4 elements of the understanding that we want students to know, and we're going to focus questions on. Next. So I also said, as well as defining understanding, we want to define what the range of situations in Bloom's taxonomy we want to apply to. So this is really important because students typically think that, let's say, natural selection is only to do with animals. They don't relate it to plants or even humans. So can you see I've set out the dimensions of the range of phenomena that natural selection applies to, different types of organisms, the characteristics that can vary, the ways that organisms compete for resources or avoiding predators, and the kinds of advantage that we want them to be able to recognize in the environment, whether it's to do with survival or reproduction. This is mapping the whole territory we want students to get to. Next. Okay, so now we've defined understanding and the outcome of being able to apply your knowledge. We can get into the business of writing the question set. This is the model we're going to use. You could come up with a different one, but we think this makes some sense and applies a lot of research. First, as you're probably familiar with the idea of a hinge question, we're using this to identify where the students are. So we've just taught them something. We have no idea at the moment how many have understood it, how many need more time. Maybe some of them actually could go straight on to applying their knowledge, but we just don't know. So the checkpoint question is there to really find out for us and for students what's the next step. It's going to be the same sort of thing as they've just been taught, because we don't want to make it too hard. We just want to know what they got. And then based on their answers, we're going to go one of 2 ways. Either rethinking, which means going into more depth, these bits of the understanding I told you that weren't necessarily grasped first time. But if they did get it, then the second option is to go straight for the more general situations, moving students along this pathway to being able to apply knowledge by extending the range of situations they've been exposed to and can apply to. Next. So I have to give you some kind of idea of what we're doing in science so you can get the gist of this. Imagine we've taught evolution through this kind of scenario where you've been to an exotic island and you've seen, this is in Indonesia, that there are these really amazing dwarf elephants. Very surprising phenomenon. How did they ever turn out so small compared to the standard size elements? And that's the phenomenon that students are taught through. Why are there dwarf elements on this island? Next. And when they finished that, right, we've explained how the natural selection process works in that context and why it produces dwarf elephants. We set a checkpoint question, as I said, almost identical to the first one they were taught, but this is there to see what they grasped. So it turns out there's another species that's adapted to being on an island, which are the rats that have gone the opposite way and become a lot bigger. So students' first question is to see, can they explain that just by regurgitating, if you like, the 4 steps of evolutionary explanation. Next. Now, we make it easier for them to respond by giving them a graphic organizer like this. So they just have to complete the boxes. And so we can see quite easily, did they grasp each bit of that idea, right? Next. And either you show them as the teacher or they can self-assess using a model answer, whether they got each bit. So that is the hinge, right? Based on that, you decide, did they get enough of those individual ideas that you can move on to generalize this, or if they didn't, then we need to do some repair work on those individual components of the understanding. Next. So that's the hinge. We go first to look at rethink. What do you do if they didn't get it? Next. So a rethink question in this context would be to look at one of the components, the bits of that idea of natural selection. And here they are again: variation, competition, survival, reproduction. I'll show you one example for variation. Next. So question 1, right? This is designed to be focusing in on just what varies in a population, not the other aspects of natural selection for now, just this one. So adorable cats. You can see what varies. So it's not actually a hard question, but you want the students to be able to practice thinking about one characteristic and how is it different amongst the different individuals. Next. So a progression to question 2, which is also about variation, would be to look at another example, this time plants, not animals, so they can see that this idea extends across the animal and plant kingdom. And here the variation is not so obvious because it isn't just about color, it could be about scent and other things. And then question 3, again, another little progression, because this time it's about humans and it's actually more difficult for students to think about human variation maybe than all the creatures that they've learned all about for years with their adaptations. So we have a little progression, but we're focusing in on one unit of the understanding. Next. So that was what I said would happen if they didn't get it. Questions to develop each bit of understanding. Now let's look at what happens if they did. Here, the purpose is to go beyond the initial teaching example and broaden and generalize students' ideas. Because in the end, that's what being able to apply means. Being able to recognize the same idea underlies a variety of phenomena. But if we do that in one go and just go way off into some difficult question, students are unlikely to bridge that gap. So we make the gap as small as possible and we go in small steps. So the first step, question 1, would just be to look at a different kind of organism. So we choose polar bears, right? But we've removed some of the scaffolding here that shows things that they learned in the original lesson, that's disappeared. So they actually are looking at a slightly more real situation. How do they figure out how the polar bear got from being a one color to another, or one size to another. Next. And then we look at completely different organism, completely different kind of adaptation. And again, with the roots, it's much more difficult to figure out what the stages are. So a little bit more challenge. Next. And then question, oh, we have no question 3. Okay, so that is the end. So what I've tried to demonstrate is that we're taking students on a pathway from just having the knowledge to knowing whether they've understood all the key elements, to being able to generalize them across a range of examples. And if they can get to that stage, they're ready for moving up to that Bloom's level of now problem solve with your knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. Okay, we're going to show you now is a quick clip. Some of you may have seen this film. It's called, I can't remember, Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And this is an example of a teacher asking her class some question, asking his class some questions. So I just want to see if you can say what's bad about this. So again, in the chat, please say what's bad about it. Give me a second. Let me share my screen. Okay, can you see that on the screen, Avril?
Yeah.
If you manage a team, you have to try Monday.com. Monday.com is a platform to track.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the, anyone? The Great Depression, passed the, anyone? The tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which, anyone, raised or lowered? Raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression. Today, we have a similar debate over this. Anyone know what this is, class? Anyone? Anyone? Anyone seen this before? The Laffer curve. Anyone know what this says? It says that at this point on the revenue curve, you will get exactly the same amount of revenue as at this point. This is very controversial. Does anyone know what Vice President Bush called this in 1980? Anyone? Something DOO economics. Voodoo economics.
Okay, so that was just a quick clip about showing a teacher doing a pretty bad job of questioning his students. So, a quick question for you. On average, how long does a teacher wait for an answer after asking a question? From that video, you can probably see that he didn't even wait, he didn't even ask anybody. He just pretty much told them the answers themselves. So we're going to do a quick poll now. And here we go. So how long does it take? It should be on the screen now. So vote on the options on the screen. Very interesting results already. Okay, give me another couple of seconds, people to get their votes in. Okay, so this is what everyone said. So majority of people, 41%, said 3 seconds, and the actual answer is 0.9. So on average, on the research suggested that teachers wait 0.9 seconds, which is way, it's quite a big difference between 3 seconds.
Okay, so wait time is really important if we're going to assess whether pupils have had enough time to think and respond to a question. So what research has found is that a lot of teachers don't often give poor or slow learners enough time to respond So it's really important that we make sure that all pupils in a lesson are given sufficient time. And as the studies that we've looked at, there had been 1 second or less, which is not enough. What they do find is that the recommended amount of time is 3 seconds is most effective for your lower order questions or your closed questions. 1 second is not enough thinking time or response time. So the importance of waiting is that it gives the pupils a lot more time to think about the response. They can draft it out before they give the response that they want to give. It gives the pupils more confidence, and it allows them to give them a more higher order response as well. So research has shown that the pupils are more engaged if the teacher waits. With higher order questions, there isn't a set limit or a threshold on how long you should give them. But it just depends on the question that you're asking and the response that the pupils are. So you need to just decide for yourself and make sure that the time scale is within reason, but just make sure you give them long enough to respond.
Yeah. You see that, Avril? The reasons why. Yeah, cool. Okay, one other piece of research some of you may be familiar with is Rosenshine's principles, and one of his principles is asking questions and checking for understanding, and they sort of come together. His research suggests that the most effective teachers, first of all, they ask more questions in their lessons. Secondly, they involve more students. So I think the more students you can ask in your lesson, the better their understanding and better everyone making progress. As well as asking more questions, it's really important to ask them in more depth. So again, you know, trying, if you're teaching older students particularly, asking a lot more of the higher order questions than the lower order questions. One of the things he also found more effective teachers do, they spend more time explaining, clarifying and checking for understanding as well, and by asking more and more questions. Tom Sherrington, who wrote this book, if you've not had a look at this book, it's quite small, it's quite really quick and easy to read, and it explains Rosenshine's principles really well. So I do recommend, if you something you're interested in, to have a look at it. Tom Sherrington came up also with this bit about explaining the processes they use to answer questions. So when I'm modeling something, I'll always try and explain my thinking, or if I'm asking a student to answer a question, I'll say, why did you come up with that answer, or how did you come up with that answer? And that's just as important as asking the question.
So the feedback that the teacher provides to the students is just as equally important as the questions that we're asking. You can gauge from a pupil's response whether they've misinterpreted the question that you've asked, and with your response you can redirect them. So you may want to ask another pupil to answer the question and give them a bit of feedback on their answer. And the most effective teachers will continually probe the students to ask them the right questions to get them to dig deeper if they've only given a partial answer, or if the answer is not correct. So research has shown that redirecting well and probing are really effective in improving pupil responses. So we need to make sure that we're moving away from vague or critical feedback, such as "that's not right" or "try again." That's not linked to good performance. So it is important we validate that if the question is correct, but then obviously move on and build upon that and ask them, why is your answer correct? Or ask other students to get involved and ask why somebody's answer is correct. So I'm going to talk about Socratic questions. So these have evolved from the early Greek philosopher and a teacher that believed that thinking is not driven by answers, but by questions. So the questions, Socratic questions, explore complex ideas and issues, and they probe the pupil's understanding and thinking, and it allows us to allow for deep analysis and evaluation to get the real deep thinking from students. Socratic questions, I've used them best to be used verbally after you've asked questions in a lesson. And there are 6 different levels of questions that are considered important. So I'm just going to talk you through typical little verbal questions that you might want to ask. A little tip about these as well is if you might, there's so many of them as we work through them, but you might want to have these printed out on your desk, or might have them pinned up around your room. So it allows you, for pupils giving a response, you can, you're not having to think on the spot, and you can have a quick look around to see if there's any questions. So the first one is about getting students to clarify their thinking. So if they've given an answer, why did you say that? What do you already know about that? That's a really interesting point. Could you explain further? Number 2, challenging and probing students about their assumptions. So is this always the case? Do you agree or disagree with this? And what is that response based on? Number 3 is to demand evidence from the students in their answer. So why did you say that? Can you give me an example of this? Is there a reason to doubt this evidence? How do you know this? So these are really good questions to ask throughout your lessons when pupils are responding. Number 4, looking at alternative viewpoints and perspectives. So the questions you might want to ask is, what is the counter argument for that? What are the advantages and disadvantages, etc. And number 5 is exploring implications and consequences. So you could ask them things like, how does that affect, or what would have happened if we'd have done this, or if the result was this. And also a good one is questioning the question. So why do you think I asked that question? Have you got any questions about the original question, and why was that question important? And all of these strategies, they just help to really deepen the understanding, and you're digging down deep and probing the students verbally in the lesson to make sure that their understanding is secure. Hinge questions, as Tony referred to these are really useful, quick little strategies that you can do. You can do them at the start or throughout the lesson or after a series of lessons. They're dead quick and easy. You usually do often a short response for this. You might want to plan and do some multiple choice ones. We've been using these a lot in lockdown during the online learning. We've created some Microsoft Forms, or if you could use Google Documents. We use these to then assess whether the pupils have grasped what they've been learning over the lessons. You plan them best to have distractors or built-in misconceptions within your multiple choice answers. So it'll make sure that they're not just guessing. And if they do all go for the misconceptions, then it shows that they've not fully understood it. So you want to readdress that in your future lessons. This one we've developed really well as a department recently. So making sure all the staff have got access to mini whiteboards. They're ideal for using hinge questions at the start or mini plenaries throughout. You get the instant feedback from children. Best practice to give them a countdown and then ask them all to hold it up at the same time to avoid copying. It also allows them to make mistakes and wipe out any mistakes and correct their own work before they're doing final answers. I use them a lot as well for doing exam practice as well, so they can write their answer on the whiteboard before actually writing it on the exam paper. So just going to show you a video of this strategy. So I'm sure you've probably heard of this one, but it's just to increase the engagement and make sure everybody's listening. So if they've been asked a question once, it doesn't mean that they're not going to come back to.
Pose, pause, pounce, bounce is an effective questioning strategy which promotes active talking and listening during class discussion. This strategy also encourages each student to take risks in their learning. This strategy has 4 parts. First, pose a question to the whole class. Insist that students keep their hand down, listen to the question, and remind them to be reflective. Secondly, pause. Give the students time to process and think about the question. Thirdly, choose a student to answer the question. If they are struggling, help them with prompts and scaffolding. Finally, bounce the answer of the first student across to another student to respond to this answer. They can give their opinion or add additional information.
So think, pair, share. So this is a Kagan strategy. You give the class a specific time task. You give them talking time in pairs to discuss their answers. So it allows the shy ones or the weaker ones to be able to discuss their answers. And then you cold call the students after to ask them the responses, and you can share those learning with the whole class. The advantages of that, it gives the pupils that valuable thinking time to prepare their answers. It builds that confidence up. You can be make sure you can be tactical with your pairings up as well to differentiate, and it avoids those awkward silences or the flurry of where everybody's got their hands up, so it gives them all the opportunity to interact and respond. The cold calling, another strategy to make sure engagement is there throughout the lesson. So there's another short video just to show a really effective way of doing this.
Let's go, column four, here we go.
One of the most powerful things you can do as a teacher is to cold call. That means calling on kids regardless of whether they've raised their hands. When you cold call, you want it to be systematic. Watch how Hannah Loftus does that. The first thing you'll notice is that it's pretty clear that everyone is going to get cold called. It's not personal, it's how she teaches.
Possible, let's go. Word one, what word, Cartier?
Monday.
Two, what word, Tatiana?
Monday.
Three, what word, Dion?
Hannah's kids now know they have to be listening carefully and ready at any time. They're engaged even before they get called on.
Word, Jameer. Seven, what word, Marcellus? Very good, let's go top down.
The second crucial thing about Hannah's cold calling is that she's positive. Cold calls shouldn't be a gotcha. Not, what did I just say, Sarah? But a real question. And you want the student to get it right.
Yesterday when we left Edna and Carla, give me a quick synopsis.
Let's watch Hannah one more time.
Mahogany.
She's going to call on one of her students twice, which is a great way of showing them that they have to stay engaged, even after answering once.
Good, possible, let's go. Word one, what word, Cartier?
Monday.
Two, what word?
But notice Hannah's smile.
Three, what word, Dion?
Yesterday.
Four, what word, Dion?
Mysterious.
Mysterious. Five, what word, Janai?
That smile is a home run. The message is, we're in this together. I'm going to challenge you, but I'm happy when you succeed, and we can even have a little fun along the way.
Okay, last one, Avril.
So the no opt-out is where you establish a culture of students knowing that they've nowhere to hide. So it's a little bit like the cold call, and if you can establish that culture early on in your classroom, they know that there's nowhere at all to hide out. It's about not allowing students to be able to give a I don't know as an answer. If they do give that and they genuinely don't know, you can probe them, ask them deeper questions or go back a little bit, or you can ask other students to maybe repeat an answer or repeat some information that was previously learned, and then allow them then go back to that student. So the no opt-out is a really good strategy to have to make sure that all the students are engaged throughout.
Yeah, and I think one of the key things on that as well is if you ask another student the same question, is it's to go back to that student and get them to repeat the answer that the person just gave as well. So those two strategies from Teach Like a Champion. There's loads of YouTube stuff out there, so if you've not read the book or heard about Teach Like a Champion before, there are lots and lots of really good strategies, not just for questioning but for lots of different things as well. So we've come to the end of our webinar. Just wanted to say a massive thank you to the people on the screen. First of all, Elementary Technology, who have provided us with the webinar software, which I know costs a lot of money to have. Crown House Publishing and the Sticker Factory, will thank them publicly now, and we'll show you why we're thanking them in a second. And big thank you to Tony as well for doing his little section on looking at that Bloom's taxonomy thing and planning activities. So thank you very much for that, Tony. Website links are on there, so when we send the PowerPoint, you can go and visit those if you want to. What we always like to do at our webinars is we like to do competitions. The last webinar, which was on starters and plenaries, we gave away, Elementary Technology gave away for us an AVA visualizer, and we randomly drew one person out, and Lucy Smith, you can see she received that a couple of days ago, and she looks very happy and she can't wait to use it in her classroom in September. Hopefully when, especially for a science teacher with no practicals during lockdown, think she's going to find that massively beneficial to demonstrate stuff. What we'd also like you to do, we'll send this out and I'll put this in the link in the chat in a second, but we've created a Google form. So we'd really value your feedback on this webinar and also ask you for ideas of future webinars as well. But this webinar's competition, there are 3 different competitions, lucky you. The first one donated from Elementary Technology. So if you fill in that feedback form, you will be entered into the competition. So if you don't, then you won't. And they're giving away 2 prizes of £25 worth of Amazon vouchers for you to spend on teaching materials only, please. So if you want a new exercise bike or some new socks, then I'm sorry, we won't allow that. It's just for teaching stuff. So you might want to get some stationery or a new book that you might want to buy. Crown House Publishing, which are a really good publishing company in the UK, and they specify in education books. So when you go on Amazon, it's really difficult sometimes to look at a range of new teaching books that have come out. So if you go on Crown House Publishing, they always have like upcoming teaching books and stuff, and they're giving away £50 worth of credit to spend on their website. What you have to do as a sort of a proviso for that is to sign up to their mailing list. So on the feedback form, there is a question which asks you, do you consent to sign up? You can unsubscribe. So as soon as they send you the first email, you can just unsubscribe if you want to, or you can get all the latest offers and discounts and stuff through them. And then finally, the Sticker Factory. This is for people living in the UK only, unfortunately, because they can only ship out to the UK. It's a place where you can order your very own personalised stickers that you might want to use in your classroom. And we're giving away 3 prizes of 4 sheets of A4 stickers, which you can personalise yourself as well. So we're going to close the competition at the end of the week on Sunday. So please get your feedback in before then, so we can choose winners for those competitions, and we'll let you know the winners next week via email or via our teaching and learning group. So if you're not part of our Facebook teaching and learning group, we'll send this out. So you can just click on the link. In there we post the competition winners, and we also give information on future webinars as well. So please join our group. We were amazed last time at the last webinar. We had 600 people join our group within like a day. It was just unbelievable. So thank you very much if you've already joined as well. And we'll just go for a couple of minutes for Q&A. So let's just pull up the Q&A, see if anyone's got any questions.
I saw somebody had asked where the link is for the feedback. Have you put that in the chat?
Yeah, I will do it in a second. I'll put it in the feedback, in the chat in a second. And we'll also send out, obviously, the resources via email, so you can get the feedback from there as well. So quick question from Pam. Would you do this through replanning curriculum for individual classes or through personalised feedback to the hinge questions? So I think that's one for Tony. Are you there, Tony? He doesn't seem to be there. I think he's gone. So Pam, we will email you the answer. We'll ask Tony. I don't know where he's gone, but we'll email you the question because we've got your email address. So I'll email you after that. Can I have a copy of the slides today? Yes, we'll be doing that. We'll be sending that out via email later this evening, hopefully. And then can I have a list of the forthcoming webinars? Avelina, so we haven't got a list at the moment. Myself and Avril are just doing these out of the goodness of our hearts to try and share teaching resources with people. So based on people's feedback, we're going to create more and more webinars. So a lot of people last time wanted some feedback on, wanted questioning. So that's why we've done this one today. So please fill in the feedback and tell us what you want. We're also going to do a poll on our Facebook group as well in the next few days to ask people what they would like for the next webinar. We're going to keep doing these until people don't turn up anymore. So we're going to try and do as many as we can for you for free, and try and get more people, more prizes to give away as a thank you for coming, really. Let me just have a look. Yep, Maria has asked a question. Can she have the PowerPoint from the first webinar? So if you join the teaching and learning group, Maria, all the resources and the recording from the first presentation is on there. So how do you plan questions easily within lesson planning? Avril, do you want to answer that one?
Just repeat the question.
So how do you plan questions easily when you're planning your lessons?
So what I use is similar to what Gary had with the Bloom's taxonomy. You can have a look on the web. There's different templates with those on. So I would have that to hand when planning the lessons and planning the questions that I'm going to be asking throughout. You can also use start off with low order questions and have them building up in difficulty to more higher order questions, and then you can have a starting point and sort of go up the ladder to the higher order questions and build upon that throughout the lesson. So I usually have a bank of questions starting off from the easy short ones up to the longer, more higher order questions.
And I think as well, it all depends on the class you teach as well. You know, sometimes you might have more lower order questions if you've got a particularly low ability class, but still have some of those higher order to stretch some of those children. Whereas, you know, if you've got a high ability class, you might just have 80 or 90% of higher order questions and just a few of the lower order ones. And I think as you go through your experience as a teacher, the more and more you teach, I think you kind of remember those questions. I remember when I was first started teaching, I used to plan pretty much every lesson. I know it's time consuming, but I used to plan what questions I was going to ask. And sometimes I even put them on my PowerPoint slides or have them in the notes on my PowerPoint at the bottom, so that I don't forget the questions, or I have them on a piece of paper and I have them on my desk, and just read them as I'm going through the lesson.
Another good strategy is to think up some questions that are typical around misconceptions as well. So if you've looked at examiners' reports and a lot of students are putting one particular answer that's actually wrong, bringing that up in your teaching avoids that slip up when it comes to doing assessments or in exams as well.
Yeah, and I think last one, Rebecca said, do you have a bank of questions you can share? So yes, we will be sending out, sorry, we'll be sending out with the PowerPoint some example question stems and banks of questions that you can be able to use in your teaching. And just use those, stick them to your desk, and keep practicing them. And you know, more and more you teach, they'll just come naturally to you. But I always think it is better to plan, because you do end up, I think if you don't, asking a lot of lower order questions as opposed to the higher order ones. And I think that's it. Yeah, all our future webinars are posted on our Facebook page, and so if you join that,
don't forget the silly bit, Gary.
Yeah.
I don't want people to go before we get to that bit.
So part of our webinar, we always like to do something funny at the end. Last time, Avril's children splattered her in the face with some custard pies, so I did a challenge this time. So I did it in my garden this afternoon. So I hope you enjoy this, and thank you very much for coming, everyone. If you've got any questions, just hang around in the chat, we'll answer them, and I'll post the link to the feedback in the chat as well. So thank you very much, everyone, and enjoy this for the last bit. Everyone, just want to say thank you very much for coming to the webinar. Hope you found it useful, and as always at the end we like to have a little bit of fun. So what I'm going to do is I've got a ice cold bucket of water, and I'm just going to pour it over my head. So are we ready? Is it definitely recording? Yeah, are we definitely recording? Good. 3, 2, 1. Oh! Dave, let's go. Thank you very much, everyone, and see you next time.